Good morning and welcome to everybody attending this session. My name is Frans van Redlinghuis. I'm the marketing manager at Senves, and we are very proud to host this session in collaboration with all the other sponsors that's been part of Nation in Conversation for several years. This is the 13th year that we've hosted Nation in Conversation, and welcome to the fifth session of this year. And today, this morning, we are talking about adopting advanced technologies for increased efficiency and yield. So we have experts from various fields, experts from John Deere, who talks about John Deere's technological advancements, but also within the financial sector. How can producers also incorporate things like blockchain, etc., within their operations? And we know we cannot go forward without the usage of technology. Technology is there for all of us to use and to also use responsibly, but also use to increase our own operations and our own business. So we want to thank the panel members and also Anli once again for hosting this session. So first of all, we will start with a short scene setter, after which we will commence with the conversation.
The future of farming is already here. In a world of resource scarcity and climate pressure, technology is the new frontier. Dryland commercial farms across South Africa face mounting pressure. Less water, rising costs, and the urgent need to do more with less. Enter smart agriculture. Powered by precision tools, the Internet of Things, and AI, farming can now be data-driven, responsive, and far more efficient. The results? Higher yields, improved margins, smarter resource use, and a reduced environmental footprint that meets global sustainability demands.
So we're talking about the benefits of technology on your farming operation from an input cost perspective as well as a yield perspective. And both of those elements, if addressed in the right way, you will see margins opening up, and you can ultimately fight the diminishing marginal returns that we are experiencing on farms today. The examples we've seen, one of the oldest examples are probably AutoTrack, where you can optimize the driving of your machine in the field and ensure that you optimally cover the area that you need to cover without overlaps and skips. So really reducing in terms of fuel input costs. So that also then goes back to mechanically how well that you set up your planter. It's good and well to have technology, but if your mechanical side of your planter, as an example, is not set up correctly, you will not see the benefit that you need to see from technology. Technology really assists you to optimize on an already optimized, to your experience, machine. It is true, and it has been proven, something like See and Spray and Exact Shop, where we see reductions in fertilizer use that's specific to the pop-up fertilizer, and then also on the chemical side, where we really see a reduction upwards of 50-60% is what's been recorded. So that not only has a financial benefit, but also a benefit on the sustainability side of your business, and let's call it your journey to renewable agriculture, where you really get yourself out of captivity from a fertilizer, a nitrogen-based fertilizer farming system that just increases your risk. But that is really important, and it's only technology that can assist you to unlock those benefits.
But innovation must also be accessible. The real test, making these solutions financially viable and scalable across commercial operations. Across the country, local innovation is bridging the gap, developing tools that work in our climate, our soil, and our economic context.
So for years, South Africa has been known to not really create technology, but harness technology for local operations. So utilizing engineering know-how and skill sets, we've seen wonderful insights. A couple of examples. A company in South Africa started a database for cow identification or cattle identification, where you simply utilize your phone, you take a picture of the cow, and that means that you can identify a cow based on its unique features. But it goes beyond that. So not only looking at certain apps on the phone, we've seen companies that integrate huge amount of data sets, from satellite images to public data sets, and then utilize this information in order to make accurate predictions on farming yields, giving you some unique insights on weather pattern changes, and can even track disease in cattle herds or plant disease that you might pick up over time. So some really fascinating technologies that is being utilized by South African companies, and we're blown away by the innovative approach to harnessing these technologies.
This is the farmer of the future, still hands-on, still rooted in the land, but equipped with powerful tools to make smarter, faster, and more sustainable decisions. Welcome to the conversation. Let's explore the tools, the numbers, and the future of farming together.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session of Nation in Conversation. We're a nice, intimate group. I suspect that the choir, those really in tune to technology, are watching this between Kakamas and Katu on the streaming platform. They're utilizing that technology as we speak, but we're very glad that you could join us here in person, and welcome as well to those who are joining us online. So today we are talking about an important issue: adopting advanced technologies for increased efficiency and yield. My name is Anli Hatting. I'm honored to be leading this conversation. We're exploring how cutting-edge technologies, from AI to IoT, precision farming, robotics, genetics, are reshaping agriculture as we know it. But more importantly, we'll ask, how do we make these innovations work for every farmer under real-world conditions in a country with complex challenges and massive potential? I'm pleased and privileged to introduce you to our panel this morning. Lafras Cronje from John Deere.
Thank you.
He's an expert in precision farming and automation with deep knowledge of how data-driven agriculture is revolutionizing commercial operations on the ground. Dr. Tracy Davids from the Bureau of Food and Agricultural Policy, who brings the critical lens of data and economic impact to this conversation. To Tracy's left, Mike Ellis from Grain SA, representing the lived experience of farmers navigating the opportunities and the real constraints of agri-tech in dryland contexts. And on the end, we are joined by Gideon Rousseau from Nedbank, who's pioneering the integration of agricultural data into financial decision-making and risk management systems. Gideon, Mike, Tracy, Lafras, thank you all for your time this morning and for sharing your expertise with us. Let's jump right in. So let's look at a bit of a scene setter, just to get the creative juices flowing. What excites you most about the advanced technologies, the role of advanced technologies in shaping the future of commercial farming in South Africa? I'm going to work that way down, and then I'll end with you so I can pick on you because you're next to me.
Thank you.
Gideon.
I was actually hoping it's going to go the other way around.
I know, I saw that in your face.
I think from my perspective and where my expertise lies is really in the context of Web3 and blockchain technology, and how we can use this in the context of finance and sort of bringing the philosophies of blockchain into the traditional banking environments. And I think the way that I contextualize it in the agri space and with a lot of the conversations that's taking place around technology is how the availability of things like precision farming, sort of satellite surveillance, soil sampling, all of these amazing technologies that's becoming available at the moment and starting to be used, can be connected to this blockchain technology environment and start creating a framework where, through the use of robotics, through the use of automation, we can start building new financial risk management frameworks, come up with new financing solutions that actually service small farmers and large farmers in very similar ways. And that's really the thing that I think is really amazing about where we are at the moment.
Mike?
I think the incredible array of technology that's available. You know, there's a length and breadth. I think we just need to walk out of these doors onto Nampo Park at the moment, and we can go and experience a bit of that length and breadth of technology that's available in South Africa for our producers here. And the key then is to say, well, how do we select the correct combination of those technologies. And I think the name technologies is in the title, that it's not just one technology that's the silver bullet. It's a combination of all of those within a local context on a farm that really is where the magic happens. So really the arsenal that's available to our farmers in South Africa, and also knowing our producers, knowing our farmers, and the sheer resilience that they've shown in South Africa over so many years, and their ability to adapt to technology and utilize that technology in such incredible ways. So when you put that out on the plate, we know that our producers, once trained and skilled and having the correct financing available to them, can utilize that in incredible ways to improve their productivity. So that's a real sense of hope for the future of farming in South Africa.
Tracy, I'm sure technology has unlocked a world of possibilities in terms of the data, the analysis, the research, and the foresight that BFAB works with on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, as an economist, I come at this from an impact angle, and so obviously get excited about the sheer quantum of information that it provides, that one can analyze, that one can use to inform decisions, to make better decisions on your farm, in the market, by the government, across the entire value chain. I think the efficiencies that one can gain in a value chain from using that information well is immense. And if you think of some of the challenges we sit with, ports, logistics, the role that this can play in alleviating that, if you think of market access, things like traceability, unlocking markets for you, managing diseases better. There's such a wide range of possibilities just in terms of risk management.
Yep.
Early warning systems, getting that data real time. Systems like AI has scaled exponentially the rate at which you can analyze the feedback that you can get literally in real time to respond early and in the correct way. And then the one thing that all of us know is just the yield benefits, and I'm sure Lafras will talk about that. But if I just look back at the last 10 years, soybean yields, maize yields, 4% per annum increase in South Africa, much faster than our international competitors. That's, I think technology is a big part of that. And what we have today, I think, has made, not only does it provide us with opportunities, but also it's rapidly accelerating the rate at which these technologies can evolve, things like AI and breeding technologies and so forth.
Lafras, in a certain way, those in the mechanization space, they have their job made a little bit easier, because as soon as you think the word technology, people picture a machine of some sorts, a drone, a robot, a massive planter. So, you don't come from one of those sort of side-lying areas of technology where you have to convince people this is also technology. They immediately think of what you do. But you have to translate that very carefully into the economic real-time benefit, right?
Yeah, true. So I would say, John Deere might have started off as a hard iron company, and probably by luck we might be seen as one, but we actually a technology company. And I think the most exciting thing for us on technology is now there's multiple silver bullets, like Mike mentioned, or lifelines. And if it's on the hard iron side, or on the seed, or the fertilizer, or chemicals, or the knowledge, this will help us as a nation, grow more food. If it's corn, if it's fruits, or whatever, but produce more food, sustainable, and help our farmers, which is already farming smart, even further, so that this is sustainable. I think this is the future.
Yeah. So there's lots of layers of technology, how we apply it, what the impact is, achieving optimal usage of technology so that in turn can optimize yields, efficiencies, etc. And we're going to look at it in a couple of layers. So I want to start off with precision agriculture, AI, and the Internet of Things. Lafras, I'm going to start with you this time. I said I was going to pick on you.
Sure.
What are the most promising applications of precision farming and automation that are already driving results on the ground? Because we know the rate of advancement in technology is incredibly rapid, and farmers in South Africa are early adopters, so they're already looking at the technology that's coming. But let's first talk about what is already in play.
Yeah, so, and like you say, very true. Our farmers are early adopters, and that is a great thing. But there's still a little bit of a gap. to get everyone adopted. So let's start with the basics. We know that in small rural communities, maybe it's not always easy to get young folks to stay. So applying technology will help you make an operator act like a professional, like a well-seasoned operator. So you can put me in a machine tomorrow, and as the owner of the product, you can really help me, guide me. The technology will guide me to act like a well-seasoned operator. So immediately there's a reduction of risk for the owner. If it's the guidance, if it's the mapping, if it's the data, knowing exactly how many hectares you've put down, how many seeds, your yields for the specific field with that specific soil conditions, fertilizer, chemical application, relating into what type of yield. And then you start to save on time, on fuel, on chemical, and if it's carbon footprints or chemical footprints or yield increases, but the sky is the limit.
Yeah.
In the benefits that you can unlock through using these technologies on the machines.
Gideon, what technologies do you believe are being underestimated in agriculture today, and why are we missing their potential?
Yeah, I think that's a tough question for me as a finance person coming out of a banking environment to answer, probably for the audience. But I think that the context where we are dealing with, and things that I'm aware of that we've as a bank sort of engaged with sort of in the last few years, is really around how do we take these things, these technologies that are available to seasoned farmers, well-established farmers, people that come from a farming context. They've got land, they've got seed, they've got finance, they've got the process behind it. How do we actually take that and make that available to people that come from an undeveloped sort of context, people that don't have sort of inherited sort of exposure to this context? And I think that is where I'm sort of starting to look at the stuff from a blockchain perspective, and what we do from a finance perspective is to try and see how we can create financial solutions connected with these technologies and effectively start making it possible for newcomers to come into the space. Coming up with ideas, coming up with structures of how we can enable people that only maybe have 5 or 6 hectares of land to grow stuff, to come together, create collections of people, and finding solutions where in that context you can create new types of farming structures and leveraging the existing technologies in that context. So I think my area is sort of more in that space in terms of how can we take the stuff that's already working and that is already sort of there and for which there are very well-known structures, and see how we can sort of create new context with the technology and the things that we're sort of familiar with in the banking world to make it accessible to people that don't have access to that at the moment.
Mike, perhaps you can sort of carry on with that point from your experience with farmers, seeing the kind of technologies that they opt into and that they adopt readily, but where they still find and experience some challenges where that technology is perhaps not optimally used. What's been your sense?
Yeah, so again, I think there's a broad breadth of technology, and so we can look at for us this kind of area of mechanical technology and all the IT and digital stuff that linked up with with that. There's other areas in genetics and in crop improvement and so forth that we can also explore, and at each level within our producer ecosystem, the answer to that question is going to look very different, because something that has been adopted maybe by a very large scale commercial farmer maybe 5 years ago may at this point now become useful to others within that ecosystem. So the timeline of adoption looks different depending on where, are you a small scale kind of producer or are you a much larger scale producer? So I think the answer to that is we need to look at the different segments within our producer system and say, well, within this segment, where are the opportunities for adoption of new technology, which may not be so new, but more, I think maybe a better term there would be impactful technology for that system or for that farmer or the way in which or the commodity that farmer is trying to farm with or move into. And so I think, so I think there's many areas, I think that we could look at and say, well, this area for this segment is underutilized. Maybe we look at the chemistry, that on the applicability of certain chemicals that have been used in certain spaces. Well, we know that there's challenges with deregistration of chemicals and the need to move into kind of new areas when it comes to managing herbicide resistance, for instance, in certain areas. So there's always emergent kind of needs, and I think the selection of technology within those emergent spaces looks very different. So I think we can then look at, I've talked about machinery, I've talked about genetics and crop improvement. The other areas of technology would be soil and nutrients, and how is that utilized in terms of the soil, and the last is maybe crop protection and what technology is available there. So again, they're selecting an array of technologies that are applicable within a certain context across these technology areas, I think is critical to make an impact within that particular farming operation.
Tracy, so the one thing that comes up quite regularly, it actually came up in one of our previous discussions at this year's Nation in Conversation, but, assuming that these audience members might not have been there, I think it's worth reiterating that data comes up constantly as a stumbling block if we do not use it efficiently, if we do not share it, if we do not see it instead of ownership of data, if we teach ourselves to see it more as in data points are not to be owned, they are to be shared, and they are to be collaboratively utilized so that we can all make better decisions together. What are you experiencing in terms of a shift in mindset from farmers on the ground who collect vast amounts of data through their machinery, their systems, their production systems that they have in place, and where that data goes to?
Yeah, so data, I mean, it obviously it can unlock the world for you, but there's many aspects to it, and I think a lot of people have legitimate concerns with respect to data. If you just think things like cybersecurity and that sort of thing, so one can absolutely understand that there's a concern amongst producers that data should be safe, right? But then, of course, where I'm standing as a researcher, one wants access to that data. You want
keep
to
it safe, right?
Yeah, of course. you want to learn from it as much as you can. So, when it comes to data, I think you got to think about, where is it housed? How secure is it housed? How accessible can you make it? But of course, within the confines of identity, things like the POPI Act and things like that. But the possibilities from that, the data that a John Deere, for instance, collects with the precision machinery, the sheer amount of data that you can get from a single season, from a single trial, compared to past practices is immense. So now you have guys adopting technology, generating these masses of data, and if you use that data well, you analyze it, you learn from it, and you put that information out, you can help people well beyond those that are able at this point to adopt the technology. Maybe they will take it up later, maybe it becomes more affordable in time, etc. But if we can shape the standard practices, in terms of efficiency of application, seeding rates, application rates, all that sort of thing, if we can learn from this and feed that information back to our smaller producers, then they're also benefiting from the technology more in an indirect way. So I think, if you really critical and generate the right insights, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, I think it's also, the potential for a group of farmers in the same region to share data amongst each other and go, hang on, we've got the same machinery, we've got the same technology, but you achieved percentage point higher yield than I did. What was it? Was it the irrigation? What was the time frame? And then to share data to benefit yourself as well, ultimately. It's not just to benefit people further down the line, but collectively to drag each other up our boot hills.
I think there's a context that sort of comes from the environment where I work in terms of making information available to everybody, so that information is not something that is owned by somebody. There's not an intermediary that controls that information. That it's actually quite important in this context, because we've seen it in many cases where people will use data, manipulate data to achieve their own goals. And that's very easily achieved when you've got sort of ring-fenced data and you sort of not everybody have access to the same information. So I think the context where you can start democratizing data, make data available to everybody, and that everybody can effectively look at the data, make their own conclusions, and actually verify that the experts that are making certain statements actually are making those statements on sound assumptions. That is a very important thing to start getting to in this context.
You want to add to that as well, of course,
I just want to add what Tracy said. I think data security is critical.
Yeah.
And so it's super important for us to make sure that the customer or the farmer, he or she owns their data. And only they can then say, well, I want to bring in an agronomist, a chemical expert, whomever, to look at my operation. So the first thing is secure the data. But then, like you said, they can also start to benchmark and share their choice, who they want to share with. Because that benchmarking will help us unlock additional values.
Absolutely.
And best practices. And then I think the last thing Mike mentioned on again, data and all these things coming together. I think the other opportunity is, although we see some producers really adopting technology, they're not going deep enough. Maybe they look at how they seed or plant and they know what chemical they put down, how much, and what they harvest. But they're not really documenting each step. Let's look at grain farming, or corn. So what's the soil corrections? What's the land prep? When do you seed? What do you seed? How deep? What's the chemical? What's the rate? Not on the farm, per field. Because we want to get to per seed and per kg of chemical or fertilizer. And then as you go to chemical application and harvesting, and as you start to layer all these things, then you can really find a way to unlock not production on your 500 hectare farm, but on that 10 hectare block that you thought is maybe marginal. What do you need to do different there? And I think then as we learn this, we can then also use some best practices on the data. And let's say, for example, you're a contractor, you've got the machine and there's 10 smaller farmers in the area. By just knowing where the machine is and what you do and what the customer want to be done, you can actually service 5 or 10 or 50 individual farmers and give each of them a report out on, I did this for you, this is how much seed you asked me to put down, and the chemical and the yield. And so you can start to extend the data also to this person not owning the machine or the technology, but the sky's the limit on this thing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I think also just risk management. I mean, I think obviously from a financier's perspective, but things like early warning. If you just look at the climate over the last few years, how up and down it is, the small windows that we have to do things. That information is so useful in informing decisions almost in real time. And not just your decisions on farm, I think that's a critical aspect, but also decisions taken in the value chain to service you, decisions by input providers to have the right things ready for you at the right time. And then also just reporting. I mean, if I think like, ESG standards, that sort of thing, the additional reporting standards in many of our export markets, the opportunity there is absolutely massive. I think we heard in the intro, doing more with less. I think that's been long-standing, but these days it's almost doing more with less and while emitting less and proving it. So there's additional aspects coming to this, and obviously the more data you have, the better you use that, the better you can report, and then it becomes a marketing tool as well if you do this well.
I think one of the points that we're coming to next is around sort of sustainability, resource efficiencies, and that idea of doing more with less, being able to prove it. And we've got to keep in mind that the long-term goal is not just technology for its own sake. It's not increased yields because we like high numbers or bigger is better. It's because that's the only way farmers will stay on their farms. Businesses will remain sustainable, profitable, so that we can grow the economy, create more jobs, etc., etc. It's not a choice anymore. This is the only way to do it, is And I want to come to you, Mike, and talk about resource efficiencies. a lot of these areas, around Nampo, we're looking at dryland farming. The climate pressures in South Africa are immense. They're only going to get worse. How do we see technology unlocking potential in different ways and solving for risk in our context?
I think the one thing we need to accept in the world, in living on Earth, is it's a dynamic system. It's a changing system, and that's not going to stop. We're a biological ecosystem. Our population, the human population, is growing. The climate is changing. The playing field changes, and that's what makes it such a beautiful thing to live on the world. It's not, every day is not the same. There is a dynamic nature to being a human, to being alive, and I think that technology therefore needs to accept that. That there's not, again, getting back to that concept of there's not one silver bullet. There's always going to be a need to make progressions in technology and to move on in our technology and to select the correct technology for those changes that are taking place on our farms and so forth. So at the moment, for instance, herbicide resistance is becoming a problem with weeds. So we need to adapt to that. So there's new weeds coming onto South African soil because of globalization and movements of plants and animals around the world. So there's new weed species being introduced, but then there's also weed species that adapt themselves to the chemicals that they're being exposed to, and therefore we need to move in our chemistry and the available chemistry that's available on farms to respond to those challenges, because we need to feed a large population both in South Africa and in those areas that we export to, Southern Africa and other parts of the world, that are dependent on the maize that we are producing in South Africa. So there's a lot at stake there. So we need technology, therefore, to adapt and respond to that dynamic nature in the world and those changes. And that's all across the spectrum. Yes, as you say, climatic. That yes, we understand a little bit about the climatic changes that are taking place. We've seen that this year. It's not been an easy year for our producers. It was this
people have used stronger words than that recently. I've heard them.
And it's like a roller coaster, I must say. Like I'm fairly new to the grain industry itself, but it really is like a roller coaster. Earlier in the year, we had our Congress as Grain SA with our producers, and there's a wonderful sense of hope, because there'd been early rains, things were growing well, it was going great. And now we had these really late season rains that made it almost impossible to harvest. So I spoke to one of the producers and he said, I can hear my soyas popping in the fields. I just can't get into them to harvest them.
Yeah.
So the challenges of a dynamic changing environment then changes the selection. And even in just before that, because of the wet conditions, now there are farmers that were using drone technology really well to go and deal with sclerotinia, a fungal infection on soyas, and using that really as site-specific applications, So being able to adapt and having the technology at your fingertips that you can then adapt to that dynamic environment, I think is very important.
And I think it's important to point out that people are emotional beings. We take time to adjust. We first have to feel things and think through them and try and understand what's coming and analyze it. And then even though we've taken time, we still might make an emotional decision. So to some degree, taking the emotion out of this decision-making process through the use of technology that can analyze without the emotion, be objective very quickly and pivot in the right direction, it makes our jobs and our lives a lot easier. But we as humans are still a part of the process. Technology does not take away our responsibility. It doesn't take the risk away from us. We're ultimately the ones who are going to be left with these businesses. So farmers will all ask you, klop die som. Show me the proof, show me the data, show me how it increases yields, reduces my risk. What's the long-term financial strategy to pay off technology that can often be expensive? So Tracy, give us some examples where the data that you have access to shows conclusively how technology has unlocked potential, even on broad terms, over the last 5, 10, 15 years. And I know that might be a difficult... You want to jump
I
in?
jump at that first? Yeah.
Okay.
So, and when you look at the data, you think it can't be, but it's proven. So just two examples. Let's look at grain production. And if it's exact apply or if it's high value crops, if it's nuts or fruits, smart apply. Two technologies already available in the market. And Mike mentioned about resistance and. So it's critical important to know when you need to apply the chemical and not too little, not too much. If you look at exact apply, 25% in the reduction of the chemical applied. That's the first gain by knowing exactly what you need to apply. A very stupid thing. When your machine turns, you normally put down too much chemicals on the inside and too little on the outside. If it's headland management, all these things, but exact apply. On top of that, 30 to 35% saving in time. So now if it's saving in time, maybe your people on the farm can do some other stuff. You start to save fuel, carbon emissions. So this thing has got a knock-on effect. But when you go to even more important one like smart apply and the apples and the pears we eat, in Ceres, the test has been done in apples, and 30, 35, 40%, I mean some fields even more, reduction in chemical use. 65, 50, 60, 70% reduction in runoff of chemicals, mist in the air, and that's through the use of knowing where this technology, through the use of knowing where the machine is. So your satellite receives GPS, LiDAR, so it already measures the thickness or size of the tree, the leaves, where to spray, where not. I mean, this is fantastic.
Yeah, 30, 40%. I mean, if you're talking about, comparative figures, inflation, economic growth, our country's economy is expected to grow 0.what% this year, Tracy, you'll know? 0.6%, right?
I think we're above 1 for 25.
Okay, so 30, 40% savings on chemicals, etc. That's quite advanced.
And how my mind works, I would rather take a worm and an apple, okay? But if I can know that the chemicals applied on my apple is reduced by half, that's big.
Yep.
I mean, to add to that, the whole EU policy environment is trying to achieve that half chemical use. So if you think that's our, from an export perspective, that's our primary market, so our product is going. If you that's already achieving it for you.
Yep.
Beyond that, the cost reductions, the greater packouts, the quality implications for your fruit, which obviously then can maybe go to exports when maybe they would have been sold locally, which is already a big price differential. It's a possible premium in the export market, so it's massive implications financially.
And everything documented, fact-based, data-based.
Yeah, reportable.
Yeah.
There's a paper trail.
Yeah, and there just needs to be alternatives, So is there a mechanical alternative that we can also, introduce that reduces our need for those chemicals? The worst thing we can get to is a place where we're forced to remove a whole lot of stuff that we're using, technology that we're using, and we don't have something in its place, because then our farms collapse, So we need to have alternatives to the technologies that we're currently using, and we understand there's better alternatives, but it's, do we have the research in place that made it possible? Is the industry being supported, and are they coming on board in ways that respond to those changing and dynamic environments? But we don't want to get to a place where our producers suddenly don't have anything in their technology arsenal to be able to deal with the challenges that are very real. They're literally dealing with tiny margins sometimes to make sure that they're profitable between supporting their family and not, and the available technology that will, because of legislative changes or demands from trade, international trades, that are being put on them and forcing them to change or remove certain practices that they're doing. But do we have alternatives? And I think we that's why these conversations are so key to make sure that okay, we've got that, we see this on the horizon. Let's make sure that we move in the direction that provides us alternatives that safeguard our producers.
I want to start looking at investment in technology. Gideon, from your perspective and from banks and financiers' perspectives, are we seeing a solid business case for investing in agri-tech, especially for medium to large-scale farms?
Look, I need to quantify. I'm not in Nedbank as a finance or economist in that context, so I can't really sort of speak with a huge amount of clarity from that space. I'm a technologist within Nedbank. But I mean, there's mechanics around the stuff that just make sense. I mean, there's things that if I just listen to Lafarge and guys in terms of what they're talking about, the application of pesticides and sort of chemicals for plants. I mean, it doesn't take rocket science to understand that this is actually a mechanism that we can use to input into our models and into our considerations when we want to sort of provide finance to people. And having understanding and access to this data is the thing that helps us make those decisions. I think one of the things that I'm very excited about, the technology and sort of where we sort of playing a fundamental role in, Lafarge was talking about the context and the technology where for each individual tree you can actually sort of get an analysis and understanding of what needs to happen at that tree. Being able to sort of have that level of information and being able to create financing solution where almost at a tree level you can say, okay, well, that is the financing that you need for each of those trees, and you can actually monitor what's happening with each of those trees. I mean, it just opens up a whole world of a different way of doing business. And I mean, to the stuff that I mentioned sort of at the start, being able then to start creating mechanisms and processes where newcomers into the market can go and buy a 5-hectare piece of land and go and plant a bunch of apple trees, and you can start creating mechanisms where through this technology and through access to the technology you can actually start building a long-term business sort of construct around what's happening with that sort of entity's context. Makes it possible for us to come up with new solutions, new ways of financing the context, making it possible for them to use contractors that have access to equipment to come and use and do stuff on their fields. So I think it's an amazing sort of context in which we're operating.
We were talking a little bit off air before the session started about technology as it's a no-brainer, but saying that you have to get in the game. You cannot wait too long, because if you wait too long thinking, oh, in 5 years' time my operation will be big enough that I can then immediately access the larger or more advanced technologies, you're not in the stream. It's passed you by. You need to get in there at whatever level you can manage, and that is going to have a benefit to your operation at the scale at which you are now. So it's like a bit like the lotto. Tata ma chance, tata ma millions. Tata ma technology, or say goodbye to your business. You can't win if you don't have skin in the game. But I want to talk about the enabling environment. Because technology... and I suppose we have to be very thankful for farmers in South Africa having been early adopters, because for that reason, international companies have been investing in bringing their technology to South Africa through companies like John Deere, seed companies, chemical companies, research-based companies, etc., for decades, and we have had access to that, which means when new technologies develop, our farmers have the option of buying into those systems from early on. But we have to create a policy environment, a regulatory environment that supports that, extension services, R&D, training. There's a wealth of stuff that happens around, not necessarily in the value chain, but in the farming support systems where technology needs to be used. How do we do that better than we are now? Because sometimes it feels like we sit with debates around regulations and phasing out of chemicals and getting stuff through the ports and getting stuff to the farms where, hang on, we shouldn't be... We're beyond that, but we do still suckle. Why?
So I just think, in essence, if I need to sum it up, I think technology, regardless of what technology, should be more accessible, regardless the size of the producer.
Does that mean
or the crop?
John Deere's are going to be cheaper? I'm just
I'll take you up on that. Our technology.
Put him on the spot.
Our technology.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
No, you're quite right. Our technology is already becoming cheaper. Yeah. So Tuesday we launched our Precision Ag Essentials. In short, it's making technology more affordable, more accessible, more adaptable, so that we make it easier for the farmer that's watching this bus go by to get on it. and then they can scale it over time. But that's exactly what we need to do. We need to make it easier for people to access it, make it more affordable, and then adaptable over time. And it sounds contradicting because it means that, and Lucas, the sales guy, might hate me, but you don't have to now buy the brand new machine to get the latest technology on it.
You can put it on your existing machine.
If you do this thing, we will see how far we can scale this technology on your existing machine. It even means that we've got a 6430 unit on loan from a customer from Bronkhorstspruit, old tractor. At that stage, we didn't have this technology. He can buy that kit and install it. He can put it on a blue, green, pink, whatever color one, because we need to get more people access to the technology. So, 100% right.
Super.
And thank you for putting me on this.
No, I'm sorry.
Sometimes that gets you far enough so that the next level becomes affordable, right?
Exactly.
It's a critical.
Tracy, you guys were very involved with the agriculture and agro-processing master plan. And that doesn't just make provision for the basics. Technology has got a space there as well. In terms of regulatory and the policy space, are we seeing extension officers with access to AI technology to be able to service their customers at the best level? And where do you see the future going?
Look, I think when it comes to this enabling environment that you spoke about, to me there's two facets that we need to keep in mind. One is legislation and the other is connectivity. So a lot of these things, it's fantastic having extension officers with an app and it can identify, if you're talking animal disease management, you're talking plant disease, there's a lot of stuff that you can do. You need a connection.
So are you saying we need Starlink? You're saying we need Starlink?
Maybe we do, I don't know. But you only need to try and have a phone conversation in some of our rural areas to know that it's a problem. So we need to make sure that gets in place. We need that broader and more consistent, because that's a key enabler of a lot of this technology. I think even on your side, it's a critical enabler that we have to put in place. The other is legislative. So if you, a big thing in the master plan was something like Act 36, the rate of registering new products. Of course, you can encourage your producers to adopt, but you need to get the new things registered timely for them to be able to do that. I'm thinking of examples like new breeding technologies in seed, where our legislation is not harmonized with most of the rest of the world. It makes it difficult for those technologies to then come into the country. Things like AI and so forth, that's moving really, really quickly. You need to keep up in that legislative environment to make sure that these things can be adopted in a timely manner and that you can get optimal benefit from them.
Mike, I want to come to you next, and you can add whatever you wanted to add on there to what I'm going to ask you next. So we were talking earlier about how people have to stay a part of the equation. We cannot feel threatened by AI because AI is void without humans somewhere in the equation. It wouldn't have information to base its thought process on unless we were there. So we have to make sure we have people in the equation and that they are trained and skilled, that they know how to use the machinery, the technology, the satellites, the whatever else, optimally. You come from an organized agriculture space, and specifically also the Nampo Academy.
Yep.
I think skills development and training in South Africa, we need to give like a radical push somehow to get people trained optimally to use the people who are already on farms and give them the skills to use the new technology.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Interesting you asked. I've written here human resources to add on to what Tracy was saying. Like, I think we can have the great vast array of technology available to us, but if we don't have the humans that can actually use that technology, John Deere can put out the best equipment, best precision farming equipment in the world and bring it to South Africa, but if we don't have farmers and farm workers and that are skilled and people in the broader agricultural space that are skilled to be able to utilize that technology or the data that is coming off it, or to have the research capacity, the human resources within the research space to be able to utilize that big data, we're not going to maximize its benefit in South Africa. So definitely we cannot talk technology without talking humans, without talking human development and making sure that our our producers and the broader agri space is skilled in terms of utilizing it. So, yeah, maybe we'll continue the conversation at session tomorrow on an initiative that Grain SA. Our producers came to us and said, we see this as a challenge in the future of agriculture in South Africa, that we need skilled individuals to be able to run the emergent technology that we've got. And we're seeing a reduction in the amount. We're starting with technical training skills, so really technicians. We're starting at base level, getting high quality technicians in millwrights, mechatronics, and these really high quality, excellent technicians that essentially can run a lot of that. But we're broadening that training space out into operator trainings on precision agriculture equipment and other areas that service the industry, but all in line with what the industry needs. So the whole approach to Nampo Tech is to say, go to the agribusinesses, go to the equipment manufacturers and say, okay, what is it that you see is going to be the critical skills that we're going to need in 5 years and 10 years? Let's start making sure we're developing that pipeline, producing skilled at a level of excellence that's really going to be able to service the industry.
I want to put you on the spot a little bit as well and say, so as much as farmers ask, klop die som, they ask, who pays?
Yep.
And ultimately, in so many instances in the production process, the farmer is the one who foots the bill. Currently, in terms of sustainability, farmers are footing the bill until we see that pull through where consumers are also going to be footing the bill for sustainable practices. In terms of technology, farmers foot the bill to get the technology on their farms. Who foots the bill for making sure that we have these trained, capacitated, skilled individuals to serve the industry? Where does that responsibility lie? Organised agriculture has some investment in it from your position. Agri-businesses have some level of investment in it. Farmers themselves often have to train their own people. Are we seeing a collective will and a collective ek haal my beursie uit?
So I'd say yes. I think there's a great sense of ownership in this space, and I think who fits the bill, no individual. I think it's an industry challenge, and therefore it needs to be responded to through industry. So each element within the industry, whether it be a big cooperative, whether it be an individual equipment manufacturer, whether it be a producer, all of along that value chain, there's a certain investment that's needed to ensure that the skills are readily available to support the system. So I do think it shouldn't be the case that it all falls on the farmer. It shouldn't be the case that it all falls on a cooperative. It shouldn't be the case that it all falls on a John Deere, but a shared responsibility. And that's really part of our process at the moment as Grain SA, is to say, go out and say, okay, do we see the need, and are we all willing to sort of invest in this human resource challenge going forward?
I want to start sort of moving towards a conclusion. And there's two elements I want to tackle. To be prepared for the future, which is the whole point of technology, we need to identify weak points early. So I'd like each of you, if you could share with us from your unique perspective in the areas of agriculture that you serve, identify one element of the tech space. It doesn't have to be a technology, it could be an adoption or whatever, that you feel those in agriculture throughout the value chain need to pay more attention to, because it worries you that either we don't have it, we're not using it properly, or it could trip us up, because that's going to help the audience and producers out there to go, oh, hang on, I hadn't actually thought of that. Because you're the experts now, you're giving me worried faces now. But there should be lots of things that, hang on, we didn't think of this yet, let's tackle it. Let's start here.
Yeah, so I would say other than working to get more farmers adopting the technology, we need to make sure that they adopt it from the left to the right, top to the bottom, and really utilize it.
So integration, okay.
Full integration, do it as early as possible. I think a little bit more on the human side that Mike mentioned is we need to start to work with young people at the earlier stage, still in secondary school. Make sure they take the right subjects, if it's technology, if it's math or whatever, tying into what we discussed earlier the week, so that they can get on this technology journey or become a technician. It's because it's not about just dirty hands in these things anymore. Computer literacy, it's critical. And then we need to see how we can just keep the cost of training and skills as low as possible so that we can train as many. And I'll give you an example. During COVID, people not being able to travel, we decided to give training for free online to some of our dealers.
Okay.
And then after COVID, we just never took the prices back. You know, there's a slight admin fee there, and people will say, why? And my opinion is we should not make money from training. You should just break even from training or skilling up someone. It should not necessarily be a cash cow, so that you can train as many as possible people.
I hope universities are listening.
Yes, I hope so.
That's a tricky one.
I don't know if I answered your
It
question.
is a tricky one. I was just being contentious.
Do we have another hour?
Tracy.
Yeah, so maybe it's not, maybe not so much something that's worrying than just a few things that we haven't spoke about. I mean, I think of things like satellite imagery, etc., what that can do, maybe in combination even with something like AI. In terms of crop estimates. I mean, we have a fantastic crop estimate committee in South Africa, but if you think in our neighboring countries, the impact that those neighboring countries can have on our markets, if we can get an earlier view, early warning on what's going on in those crop conditions, I mean, I think the impact of that, and they are, those things are emerging, they're coming, and I think it adds massive value. Partnerships is key. I mean, I think you've touched on the human aspect. Obviously, AI is fantastic, but you need people as well to cut through the noise sometimes and to run the stuff. I think we're quite excited about a new initiative where we've partnered with Stellenbosch University and John Deere's also provided funding into that, a research chair in precision agriculture specifically. So it's a whole program focused on that. And I mean it's multifaceted, but one of the aspects is to ensure that we have students coming through with the right skill set, linking them to industry, linking them to private sector, so that when they come out of that research program, they have the skill set that you need to run with this thing. And then, obviously, things like data analytics, the broader learnings that we can take from that, publishing output so that there's a wider benefit from the data that we're generating, testing things, new technologies independently, so you don't have to believe Lafross's numbers on the John Deere. You can get an independent view as well. I think those are all critical aspects.
Mike.
I think the reality is that there's incredible technology available. We just to mention a project. So we've run actually with BFAB for a while a project called the Data Intensive Farm Management, and really currently there were 12 farmers involved using precision agriculture equipment, and it's I think the link there is to say, well, it is possible. It is on South African soil. This is happening. It's using the best available, satellite data that Tracy says. So even before a tractor has moved onto the field, there's already modeling happening as to how must we apply, seeds onto this field, how must we apply fertilizer onto this field, and very site specific, and it can have a huge potential, even in that project. The soil sampling is affected because if you use the satellite data, you can see where are your zones on a field. Rather than doing transects across a full field and you need to do 200 samples, I can say, well, this zone is similar to that zone, and therefore you only need to sample once within those particular zones. So you can reduce your soil sampling costs incredibly. But it is about, I think, realizing, educating and saying, being aware of what is the available technology. Therefore, I think somewhere like Nampo is a great place to come and start to be exposed to some of the length and breadth of what is out there and what's available. Sometimes what you may have been exposed to on your farm might be limited in terms of what the array of technology is available. So being able to be exposed to that, I think, is important, and then being able to select technology correctly according to your application on farm is critical, based within that array of technology. What suits my need? Not because my neighbour's doing it, not because I heard it works down there in the Western Cape, but what actually works is going to be best for my farm.
We hear everything works down in the Western Cape.
And maybe the last two thoughts, trust and integrity are therefore key to that. We need to trust each other in the industry, and we need to be integrous, because we're never going to have trust without integrity.
Gideon, we're saving the best for last. You're the tech guru.
Well, I've got a few seconds, so I'm going to need to keep it short. But I think for me, if I have to summarize, is flexibility. I mean, if I look at how finance tend to operate, how economic structures operate, they are very rigid. They are sort of created for long periods of time, and they stay rigid in those sort of structures for long periods of time. But I think we're moving into a space where flexibility and being able to create unique solutions for individuals and for specific sort of environments is going to be a key critical sort of context that we need to solve for. And I think that is what we need to look for. We need to figure out how in the finance industry, in the banking industry, we're going to be able to adapt around different clients and not just have one product that needs to service everything. And I think that is where we really need to sort of focus our attention on.
It's time for questions from the audience. Anyone want to take the first bite? What have we missed that you have a burning need to find out about? Anybody? It's such an exciting topic. Yes, we have a question in the back there. We're bringing you a microphone. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. My name is Julius Mashapu. I work for the Department of Land Reform and Rural Development. I'm responsible for the support of smallholder farmers in the country. The topic itself is quite interesting, but for me, what I'm battling to get a reconciliation is between accessibility and affordability. Because if you look at the topic itself, it basically looks at people who are either at medium commercial or commercial. Now, you might indirectly lose on those people who are right at the bottom. Recently, the Minister of Agriculture, before we were separated into the two departments, he launched a study that was conducted by the Human Science Research Council on nutrition and one of the findings is that almost 26% of the people in South Africa are food insecure. And if you look at this topic, also looking at what we discussed yesterday at 1 o'clock, I think there seems to be some connectivity in terms of how do we then begin to address that part. So if the panel could assist in terms of how do you then begin to close the gap so that you don't leave out those who are at the bottom, and something that you have been emphasizing, but I don't think you have been getting the correct answers in terms of how do we then bridge that gap. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pose the question to you, and perhaps there are some interesting things already happening in agriculture where we see those at the bottom, as you describe it, small scale or smallholder farmers, subsistence farmers, who are using technology in its basic form. Someone who uses their cell phone to connect with informal market clients to sell their produce, that's already a form of technology. And once people have connectivity, importantly, and they're able to switch into those basic streams of technology, things are already on the go. I mean, we see lots of trade apps, e-commerce apps being launched where smallholder farmers have access to inputs and a supply market all on the same platform. So there are exciting things happening. Yep. But are there answers to accessibility and affordability?
If I have to sort of wager something, I think that it's not an easy question, and I don't envy your job because I think you're in a very difficult sort of context to try and figure out how to sort of make this sustainable. But we're sitting in a very challenging environment, and I think to the point that was made around education, I think traditionally a lot of people in a context that sits in these sort of small farm context and the frameworks where we're trying to sort of get people into the context and become sort of self-sustainable in the context of, I think that's the first part of the sustainability, is first become self-sustainable. And I mean, we've seen so many operations where people were given the opportunity to sort of start farming and it lasts maybe 1 or 2 seasons and it disappears. And I think a lot of it has to do with lack of skills across many boards. I mean, it's maybe not understanding sort of technologies and things that are available to actually help you do this sort of in a sustainable and long sort of longevity kind of environment. Some of it is effectively understanding finances. How do I actually manage my finances so that I actually are able to plant something next year? So I think for me, there's a big part of this that hinges on skills development. I mean, just giving people land and giving them access to stuff that they need to sort of start a farm is not going to make it sustainable. You sort of need to make sure that there's a mechanism where that person can, over a period of 2 or 3 years, actually learn how can I do this in a way that this can become a 20-year operation. It can become something that actually starts adding to sort of the breaking down the food shortages. And it's not an easy thing. I mean, I'm not sort of trying to say that this is an easy thing to do, but I think we need to figure out how do we create the ecosystem to actually make that happen. I don't think it's a government only sort of problem. I think we need to figure out how technology and how banks and finances and people can get together and actually deal with this issue and not deal with it from a point of view that it's just a political thing and just that we want to do good. We need to make sure how do we do this in a financial way and in a way that is practical and make sure that it's actually got legs to it, that it can survive.
But I think there's a lot more cohesion starting to happen where people in the technology development space come from a background of no solutions and having to say, well, hang on, I know this environment, I'm going to develop solutions for this unique context, where companies are saying, but hang on, we're missing out on, for instance, the informal market. We want to access that client base. How do we do that? Technology helps us bridge that gap. So every little step forward is a step, hopefully, towards finding cohesive solutions that can work from the biggest commercial farmer, either straight down or tailored solution for different segments of the agricultural market.
So maybe one thing, not directly related, but indirectly. So, typically John Deere's might have been seen as equipment manufacturer, but we call ourselves a tech company. And because of that, other than just making tech more affordable and, we're really going to make a big effort to connect 100% of machines. So this doesn't mean it's a 100 horsepower, 200 horsepower tractor up for the big commercial guy. This is from a 30, 35 horsepower tractor. That's where we're going to end. We want to get that unit connected affordably so that if I'm a small farmer on 20, 30, 50 hectares and that's my go-to tractor, that I can start to tap in to the technologies and maybe have an app where I summons a contractor if I don't own a tractor, or do contract work for my neighbor. Using the tech, I can show you, I plow out 20 hectares, this is my fuel, this is my what, and I can bill you and start to grow my business as I farm, also do a little bit of contracting and grow my business. And I know it's not directly answering the question, but we all also want to bring this to the small equipment.
It certainly is a problem that the entire sector needs to work on collectively, but it does have the attention and the thinking, and I think we make progress by baby steps, but we do make progress, hopefully.
And I think there are some examples already of where, I think there's a long way to go on this journey. It's a journey. But I think what we are seeing is the emergence and the sentiment to come on board. So just to reflect on Grain South Africa. So we have a program called Pekama Grain Pekama, which really is a program specifically for development farmers. And what we're seeing in that program is financial institutions coming on board and saying, how do we from a risk-based process, finance a small-scale farmer? What data do we need available to us that is going to make it possible? Because you're a corporate company, you need to make your bottom line work. But how do we invest in this, but also just make sure we don't break our own businesses in the process? And there are some banks, and I'll say that with certainty, that are coming on board and saying, okay, we see how we can do this using the available data that we've got in the system, and we can go do an assessment using some GIS data on this very small plot of land and say, what is the commercial value of this? What are we as a bank willing to invest in this? So we're definitely seeing that. And there's some, I know, just having a conversation yesterday of a bank coming on board with fairly substantive funding for 12 farmers, just to test it out and say, can we test this with these 12 farmers and see if it works? So it does take that need, but I will say that there is a desire, and I think we need more of that, and we need it at a farmer-to-farmer level as well. I think mentorship is key here. It does take the producers in this country to also say, I'm willing to come on board, and I've got some local farmers that I can assist. And I think if we're all taking our roles seriously in the system, I think we can really go on that journey a bit faster maybe than we are.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions from the audience?
There's another question.
Another one. Fantastic. Hopefully it's a new question and not like you didn't answer the first one.
Have another go.
No, not really. Just a follow-up to indicate that we actually have done some of the things that we are mentioning. We have entered into partnerships with almost 12 commodity organizations. So we are trying to bring our private partners so that it doesn't seem to be a government initiative, but to include them. We've made it a point that from the transformation levies that they get, which they had mainly used it for training, but they would train these farmers, but there would not be actual support. So we brought in the part of support so that we can complete this partnership with them. There's the part that is still missing with the banks. The banks are a bit behind. They might be doing work here and there, but we don't think that they are really coming to the party to the extent that we would expect them to do. We have started some initiative with 2 banks. We've dropped one. We're remaining with one. We're hoping that will also continue in terms of building the profile of these farmers so that ultimately there's a relationship with the financial institutions for future so that they can then have access to funding beyond what government would be assisting them with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions, I think we have reached the conclusion of this session. I would like to thank you all sincerely for your time. Thank you to our incredible panel, Lafras, Stacey, Mike, Gideon, for sharing your expertise and your passion with us. Today's discussion highlighted the powerful role of technology in agriculture, but also reminded us that access, inclusion, real-world application are just as important as innovation itself. Let's continue pushing for a future where technology works for all farmers, big and small, in every corner of South Africa. And let's make sure this transition is driven not just by machines and algorithms, but by people, purpose, and partnerships. Enjoy the rest of your time at Nampo. If you want to stay seated for the expropriation session right after this, we completely understand because we think it's going to be jam-packed. And we appreciate your continued support for Nation in Conversation.
Thank you.